Okay, so like everyone in the FHIR world, I mean, it feels like everyone is always asking this one question.
Yeah.
What do you do with your files?
Yeah.
You know, when you've got all this data, the photos, PDFs, all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Where does it all go?
The whole shebang.
Exactly. It's almost like it's like trying to figure out like you know where to put that stack of magazines in your living room, right?
Right.
It's important, but it needs like a home.
Yeah. Like FHIR, like the data in FHIR.
Right.
Right. I mean, at its core, it's all about that structured data.
Right.
But then we've got the reality of healthcare, which is that there are these pieces of information that are a little less organized sometimes.
Right. And so, imagine you're like a developer. You're building this really cool FHIR app, and you've got this this huge amount of files.
Right.
What's like the first thing that should be going through your mind?
Well, I think the first thing is don't just like immediately try to cram everything onto your FHIR server.
Oh.
You need to really kind of take a step back and assess whether or not your FHIR server is even the right place for these files.
Okay, so give me an example. When would it not be the right place?
Sure. So let's say you're dealing with DICOM images. So this is like a specialized format for medical imaging.
Gotcha.
So think about those really high resolution scans you get from an MRI or an X-ray.
Okay.
Those are very, very large files, and they actually require a very specific system that understands the nuances of DICOM.
Oh, okay.
So in those cases, a dedicated DICOM server would be a much better home for those types of files.
So it's kind of like you're saying like use the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
So like you wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb, right?
Exactly.
A PDF of like a doctor's summary, that might be fine on the FHIR server.
Yeah.
But for these big image files, they need their own space.
Yeah. And even if the file type is something that, could conceivably go on the FHIR server, you also have to think about storage capacity.
Okay.
Because if you have, especially if you're dealing with a system that is constantly getting new files uploaded to it, and those files are large, that can actually really bog down your FHIR server.
It's like trying to fit a whole library into a small backpack.
Exactly.
It doesn't really work.
Yeah, that's when you might want to start thinking about external storage options as well.
Okay, so let's say we have decided that, the file type is a good fit for the FHIR server.
Okay.
We're not worried about storage capacity. What's the trick to like keeping things organized and making it efficient?
So this is where that attachment element in FHIR comes into play, and it's really quite a versatile thing. Think of it like a container.
Yep.
It can actually hold the file data itself, like the actual ones and zeros of the file.
Okay.
Or it can just have a link to the file if it's stored somewhere else.
Oh, okay. I like that. So it's like I don't know, it's like having a pocket that can hold like the thing itself, like a little trinket, or it can just have a note that says like, hey, the trinket's over there.
Exactly.
It's over there. I like the flexibility.
Yeah, it's great.
But where do these attachment elements like live? Like where do they go in the FHIR world?
Yeah, so you'll find them all over the place in FHIR. It really depends on the context. So, some really common resources where you'll see attachments are things like DocumentReference, media, communication, DiagnosticReport, QuestionnaireResponse.
Okay, so imagine this. You're building this really cool dermatology app.
Okay.
And people can patients can upload photos of their skin conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it through a questionnaire. So you get like 20 responses to this questionnaire, and each one has like a 10 megabyte image attached.
Wow.
Trying to load all of that at once would be a nightmare for the user.
Absolutely, and I think that actually is like a really classic challenge when you're dealing with FHIR is how do you deal with these, these kinds of heavier files within resources that really need to be very lightweight and responsive.
Right.
And luckily, FHIR has a really clever solution for that.
Okay, what is it?
It's called the binary resource.
Oh, this is where I think a lot of developers are going to have that like aha moment.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell me about this binary resource.
Yeah, so basically, the binary resource is, it's like a dedicated vault for just your raw file data.
Okay.
So it's just the ones and zeros. It doesn't have any of the other kind of baggage that sometimes comes along with a file when you're storing it in like a file system.
Okay, so instead of like stuffing that whole 10 megabyte image into the attachment element, what do we do?
Exactly. So instead of doing that, you store the actual image file itself in a binary resource, and then in your attachment element, instead of putting the full data there, you just put a link to it. So In the attachment.url field,
Okay.
you just put a link to that binary resource.
Okay, so it's almost like having, like, I don't know, like a separate photo album, right?
Right.
And you just put a little note in your main file that's like, hey, see photo album page 3 for like a picture of this rash.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're keeping the main record nice and concise and like, lightweight, so it loads really quickly for the user.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really important, especially, for a lot of clinicians that are using these apps. They need to be able to access information really quickly.
Right.
So that user experience is super important.
Of course. So are there any times when you wouldn't want to use the binary resource?
Yeah, there are definitely a few exceptions in the world of FHIR. So, one example would be like the provenance.signature
Right.
resource, which is deals with digital signatures.
Mm-hmm.
And that resource, that element actually requires that you put the raw file data in there.
Gotcha.
But yeah, for the most part, for most of your files, especially the larger ones, using that binary resource is going to be a lot more efficient.
So the binary resource is a really powerful tool.
Yeah.
But it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about picking the right approach depending on what the actual resource is and the file that you're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think thinking critically about where your files are living and how they're being accessed, that's just a really key part of building really efficient and user-friendly FHIR applications.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about when the FHIR server is not the right fit, leveraging those tools, the attachment element, the binary resource.
Yeah.
I feel like we've really given people some stuff to think about.
Absolutely.
So it's really about, making strategic choices that will optimize performance, make for a better user experience, and ultimately contribute to better healthcare data management overall.
Yeah, for sure.
And that brings us to a final thought for you, dear listener. So we talked all about, where files go in FHIR.
Mm-hmm.
But how about like the bigger picture? Like, how are you actually managing these files? How do you make sure like they're named correctly,
Right.
they're organized in a way that makes sense? How do you handle like versioning,
Yeah.
if a file gets updated?
Right.
These are all really important questions, as you dive deeper into the world of FHIR.
Yeah, definitely food for thought.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.